When gunmen threatened Elena's flower stand, single father Thomas stepped between them and the bullets. The next morning she discovered his heartbreaking secret. He'd been buying white roses every Saturday for 3 years to honor his dead son Michael. What Elena did next changed both their broken hearts forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching, also like, subscribe for more stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across Central Market when Thomas Walker made his weekly pilgrimage to buy flowers. Every Saturday for 3 years he had come to this same spot, searching for the perfect white roses to place on his son's grave. What started as another day of quiet grief would become the moment that changed two broken hearts forever. Thomas adjusted his worn jacket against the cool morning air as he walked through the bustling market. At 45 he looked older than his years. The lines around his eyes told the story of sleepless nights and tears shed in private. His son Michael would have been 10 years old today. 3 years ago, leukemia had taken his beautiful boy despite every treatment, every prayer, every desperate promise Thomas had made to God. His wife Sarah couldn't handle the grief and had left 6 months after the funeral, leaving Thomas alone with memories and a weekly ritual of buying white roses. White roses were Michael's favorite, he whispered to himself as he approached the flower section of the market. Said they looked like clouds that fell to earth. The flower seller was a young woman he had seen many times but never really spoken to. She was small and delicate, with kind eyes that seemed to understand sadness. Her flower stand was the most beautiful in the market, bursting with colors that seemed to chase away the gray from people's days. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, though Thomas didn't know that yet. At 28, she had been selling flowers in this market for 5 years, ever since she immigrated from Mexico with nothing but hope and a gift for making beautiful things grow. She had noticed the sad man who came every Saturday for white roses, always buying exactly 12 stems, always counting out exact change with shaking hands. "Good morning," Elena said softly as Thomas approached her stand. "The white roses are especially beautiful today." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Saturdays were always the hardest. The day Michael died had been a Saturday. The funeral had been a Saturday. And now, every Saturday, Thomas relived the loss all over again. 12 stems. Elena asked gently, already knowing the answer. "Please," Thomas managed to say. As Elena carefully selected the most perfect white roses, wrapping them with the same care she showed every customer, neither of them noticed the 3 men who had been watching the market from across the street. The men were part of a gang that had been robbing vendors in the area. They had been studying the Saturday morning routine, when people carried more cash and the market was busy enough to create confusion for a quick escape. Elena's flower stand, with its prime location and steady stream of customers, had become their target. As Thomas handed Elena the money for his roses, the men made their move. "Nobody move." The shout cut through the peaceful morning air like a knife. 3 masked men rushed into the flower section, pushing aside customers and overturning displays. The leader, a tall man with cruel eyes visible through his mask, pointed a gun at Elena. "Empty your cash box now," he demanded. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for the small metal box where she kept her daily earnings. It wasn't much money, flower selling barely paid her rent, but it was everything she had. Thomas felt anger rising in his chest. This young woman worked hard every day, bringing beauty to people's lives with her flowers. She didn't deserve this terror. "Please," Elena said quietly, her voice shaking. "Take the money, but please don't hurt anyone." The second gunman grew impatient. "Hurry up. We don't have all day." As Elena fumbled with the cash box, her hands shaking so badly she could barely open it, some coins scattered to the ground. The leader cursed angrily. "Clumsy girl. Pick it up." Elena knelt down to gather the fallen coins, and that's when Thomas saw what the gunman couldn't see from their angle. A small child, maybe 4 years old, had wandered away from his mother and was walking directly toward the scene, drawn by the scattered flowers and bright colors. The child would walk right into the line of fire. Thomas looked at the little boy and saw Michael's face. He saw every child who deserved to grow up safe, every parent who should never have to bury their baby, every flower seller who just wanted to make an honest living. In that moment, Thomas made a choice that surprised even himself. "Hey!" Thomas called out loudly, stepping forward and putting himself between the gunman and Elena. "Leave her alone. She's just trying to make a living." The leader spun around, surprised by the challenge. "Get back, old man, or you'll get hurt." "I'm not moving," Thomas said firmly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You want money? Take mine. But leave the girl alone." Other customers had scattered when the robbery started, but Thomas stood his ground. Behind him, Elena looked up from the scattered coins with wide, frightened eyes. "Mister, please," she whispered. "Don't get involved. I'll give them what they want." But Thomas wasn't thinking about the money anymore. He was thinking about Michael, about how he had been powerless to protect his son from cancer, but maybe he could protect this young woman from these men. "There's a child," Thomas said quietly to Elena without turning around. "Behind the flower stand. When I say run, grab him and get to safety." The lead gunman was getting angry. "I said move." "No," Thomas replied calmly. "You move. This is a place of business, not your personal bank." What happened next took only seconds but felt like hours. The gunman raised his weapon toward Thomas, but in his anger, his aim was shaky. Elena, seeing what was about to happen, instinctively jumped up from where she was kneeling. "No, please don't," she cried out. Thomas saw the gun moving toward Elena and made his final choice. He lunged forward, pushing her safely behind the flower display just as the gun went off. The bullet meant for Elena found Thomas instead, striking him in the shoulder and spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, white roses scattering around him like snow. The sound of the gunshot caused chaos in the market. People screamed and ran. The child Thomas had been worried about was safely scooped up by his mother. And the gunmen, realizing their plan had fallen apart, fled without taking any money. Elena crawled over to where Thomas lay bleeding among the scattered roses. "Oh my God," she repeated, pressing her hands against his wound to stop the bleeding. "The child?" Thomas asked weakly. "Safe," Elena assured him, tears streaming down her face. "The little boy is safe. You saved us both." Thomas smiled faintly. "Good. That's good." As sirens approached and Elena held pressure on his wound, Thomas noticed something strange. For the first time in 3 years, the crushing weight of Saturday grief had lifted from his chest. He had found a purpose again, even if it might be his last act. "What's your name?" Elena asked, trying to keep him conscious. "Thomas Walker," he managed to say. "I'm Elena Rodriguez." "Thomas, you saved my life." "What? You don't even know me." Thomas looked at the white roses scattered around them, stained now with his blood. "Because everyone deserves to live without fear," he whispered. "Because your flowers bring joy to people like me who forgot what joy felt like." The surgery was successful, but Thomas had lost a lot of blood. He woke up in the hospital 2 days later to find Elena sitting in the chair beside his bed, still wearing her flower-stained clothes from Saturday morning. "You stayed?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they had removed that morning. "I couldn't leave," Elena said simply. "Not after what you did for me." Over the next few days, as Thomas recovered, Elena visited every day. She brought him flowers from her stand, different varieties each day to brighten his sterile hospital room. But more than that, she brought him something he had forgotten existed: hope. Elena learned about Michael, about the weekly trips to the cemetery, about the weight of grief that Thomas carried like a stone in his chest. She listened without judgment as he talked about his son's love for white roses, about the way Michael used to help him in his carpentry shop, about dreams that had died with a 10-year-old boy. "He sounds like he was a wonderful child," Elena said softly after Thomas had shared particularly difficult memories. "He was perfect," Thomas replied. "Smart, funny kind. He would have loved your flower stand. He always said flowers were God's way of apologizing for making the world so hard sometimes." Elena felt tears in her eyes. "He sounds wise for his age." "Too wise," Thomas said sadly. "Kids with cancer grow up too fast. They understand things about life and death that adults spend years trying to figure out." Elena told Thomas about her own struggles, leaving her family in Mexico to chase a dream in America, working multiple jobs to keep her flower stand going, sending money home to help her sick mother. She told him about the loneliness of being in a foreign country where she sometimes felt invisible. "But your flowers make people happy," Thomas observed. "That's not invisible. That's beautiful." "I never thought about it that way," Elena admitted. As the days passed, something unexpected began to happen. Thomas started looking forward to Elena's visits more than he had looked forward to anything in 3 years. Her presence somehow made the hospital room feel less like a place of sickness and more like a place of healing. Elena, for her part, found herself drawn to this gentle man who had risked his life for a stranger. She had never met anyone who carried such deep sadness yet still found the courage to protect others. On Thomas's 5th day in the hospital, Elena brought him something different than flowers. "I made you something," she said shyly, pulling out a small photo album. Inside were pictures she had taken of her flower arrangements over the years, each one more beautiful than the last. But on the last page was a picture of 12 perfect white roses arranged in a simple vase. "I took this picture yesterday," Elena explained. "I arranged them the way you always choose them, 12 perfect stems. I thought maybe Michael would like to know that his roses brought his father to someone who cares about him." Thomas stared at the picture, and for the first time since Michael's death, he cried tears that weren't just from sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of connection, of feeling less alone in the world. "Thank you," he whispered. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." When Thomas was finally released from the hospital, Elena insisted on driving him home. She wanted to make sure he had everything he needed during his recovery, but she also wasn't ready to say goodbye to this man who had changed her life. Thomas lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. It was neat and well maintained, but Elena could see immediately that it was the home of someone who had stopped really living. There were no fresh flowers, no bright colors, no signs of joy or hope. But what caught Elena's attention were the photographs. The living room was filled with pictures of Thomas and a beautiful little boy with bright eyes and a mischievous smile. Michael at age 5 missing his front teeth. Michael at 7 holding up a fish he had caught. Michael at 8 wearing a baseball uniform and grinning at the camera. "He was beautiful," Elena said softly, studying the photos. "He was everything," Thomas replied. "After Sarah left, these pictures and the cemetery visits were all I had left of him." Elena noticed something else in the photos. In many of them, Michael was holding or surrounded by white roses. "He really did love white roses," she observed. "From the time he was tiny," Thomas confirmed. "We used to have a small garden behind the house. White roses were the only flowers he wanted to grow. He said they were the color of angel wings." Elena's heart ached for this man who had lost so much. But she also felt something else, a strange sense of connection that she couldn't quite explain. "Thomas," she said carefully, "where is Michael buried? I would like to pay my respects if that's okay with you." Thomas was quiet for a moment. No one had ever asked to visit Michael's grave except his own family members, and even they had stopped coming after the first year. "Evergreen Cemetery," he said finally. "Section B, Plot 47. But Elena, you don't need to." "I want to," she interrupted gently. "The man who saved my life has a son I'd like to thank." That evening, Elena drove to Evergreen Cemetery alone. She had bought 24 white roses from her own stand and arranged them in a beautiful spray. As she walked through the peaceful grounds looking for Section B, she thought about Thomas, about Michael, about the strange way their lives had become connected. When she found Plot 47, Elena stopped in her tracks. The grave was already covered with flowers. Not just any flowers, hundreds of white roses in various stages of bloom and decay. Some were fresh, some were wilted, some were from weeks ago. It was clear that Thomas hadn't just been buying 12 roses every week for 3 years. He had been buying dozens. Elena knelt down and read the headstone, "Michael James Walker, beloved son, age 10. He saw angels and white roses." But it was what she saw next that made her gasp. Scattered among the roses were small toys, handwritten notes, and other gifts. But most shocking of all were flowers that Elena recognized, flowers from her own stand that she had never sold to Thomas. Someone else had been bringing flowers to Michael's grave. The same types of flowers that Elena grew. Some were varieties that were so rare, only she carried them in the entire market. Elena looked more closely at the wilted bouquets and realized the truth. Many of these flowers had been here for months, some even for years. Someone had been visiting Michael's grave long before Thomas had ever met Elena. But who? And why flowers from her stand? As Elena placed her own white roses among the others, she noticed a small, weathered note tucked under one of the older bouquets. She carefully pulled it out and read, "For Michael. These are from the lady at the flower stand who your daddy visits every Saturday. She always makes sure the white roses are perfect for you. I think she understands sadness too. A friend." Elena's hands shook as she read the note. Someone had been watching Thomas's weekly ritual, had been connecting with his grief, had been bringing flowers to his son's grave without him knowing. But who? The next morning, Elena arrived at the market early, her mind racing with questions about the mysterious notes and flowers she had found at Michael's grave. As she set up her flower stand, she kept looking around, wondering if the secret visitor might be someone she saw every day. Mrs. Chin, who sold vegetables 3 stalls down, approached with her usual morning smile. She was an elderly Chinese woman who had been at the market longer than anyone else. "Elena dear, you look troubled today," Mrs. Chin observed. "Is everything all right?" "Mrs. Chin," Elena said carefully, "do you know the man who comes every Saturday to buy white roses?" Thomas Walker? Mrs. Chen's expression immediately softened. Ah yes. The father with the broken heart. Very sad story. Do you know anything about his son Michael? Mrs. Chen looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then motioned for Elena to come closer. 3 years ago, when the little boy was sick, they used to come to the market together every Saturday, Mrs. Chen said quietly. The father would carry the boy when he was too weak to walk. The little one loved flowers, especially yours. Elena felt her heart skip a beat. Michael came to my stand? Oh yes, many times. He was so polite, so brave despite being so sick. He would ask his father to buy flowers for other people, for the nurses at the hospital, for his mother when she was crying, for strangers who looked sad. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I don't remember them. This was before you really spoke English well, Mrs. Chen explained. You were very shy then, remember? But the little boy, he would point to different flowers and tell his father what colors would make people happy. Elena sat down heavily on her stool. Michael had been to her stand. He had chosen flowers from her hands, had breathed in their fragrance, had tried to spread joy with her flowers even while he was dying. Mrs. Chen, Elena whispered, have you been taking flowers to Michael's grave? The elderly woman's eyes immediately filled with tears. You found them? I went to the cemetery yesterday. There were flowers there from my stand, some of them very old. And there was a note. Mrs. Chen sighed deeply. After the little boy died, I couldn't stop thinking about him. He was so young, so full of love for others. I started bringing flowers to his grave, flowers I bought from your stand because those were the ones he had loved. But why didn't you tell Thomas? Because a man's grief is private, Mrs. Chen said wisely. But I also couldn't let that little angel rest without flowers. So I brought them secretly whenever I could afford to. Elena felt overwhelmed by this revelation. Mrs. Chen, this is beautiful, but you should have told me. I would have given you the flowers for free. You work hard for your money, dear. But, Mrs. Chen paused. I did notice that you always set aside the most perfect white roses on Saturdays, even before the father arrived. It was like you knew he was coming, like you wanted to have the best ones ready for him. Elena realized Mrs. Chen was right. Without even knowing about Michael, without understanding why, she had always made sure to have perfect white roses available on Saturday mornings. It was as if some part of her had been connected to Thomas's grief all along. Mrs. Chen, I need to tell Thomas about this. He should know that Michael has had guardian angels watching over him. Maybe, Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully. But be careful how you tell him. Sometimes knowing too much about kindness can make a person cry more, not less. That afternoon, Elena closed her stand early and went to visit Thomas. She found him in his backyard, slowly working in what had once been Michael's rose garden. His shoulder was still healing, so he could only do light work, but he was trying to bring the neglected garden back to life. Elena, Thomas said with surprise and pleasure. I wasn't expecting you. Thomas, I went to visit Michael's grave yesterday, Elena said without preamble. Thomas's face immediately grew serious. What did you think? I think your son has been very loved by more people than you know. Elena told Thomas about Mrs. Chen, about the secret flower deliveries, about learning that Michael had visited her stand when he was alive. She showed him the note she had found and explained how the entire market community had been quietly supporting his grief in ways he never knew. Thomas listened in stunned silence, tears streaming down his face. You mean, all this time? Michael wasn't alone there? He asked finally. He was never alone, Elena assured him. Mrs. Chen has been visiting him for 3 years. And Thomas, I think Michael led you to my stand for a reason. I think he wanted his father to find someone who understood about making beautiful things grow, about bringing joy to people who are hurting. Thomas sat down heavily on his garden bench. I can't believe this. All this time I thought I was the only one who remembered him, the only one who cared. Love creates more love, Elena said softly, sitting beside him. Michael's love for others inspired Mrs. Chen to love him. Your love for Michael inspired me to care about you. And maybe all of this love is Michael's way of making sure you don't stay sad forever. Thomas looked at Elena through his tears. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe the boy who saw angels and white roses sent an angel to watch over his father. Over the following weeks, Elena began spending more time at Thomas's house, helping him restore Michael's rose garden. What started as friendship was slowly becoming something deeper, though neither of them wanted to rush into anything. Thomas taught Elena about carpentry. He was crafting a beautiful wooden trellis for the climbing roses. Elena taught Thomas about different types of flowers and how to arrange them for maximum beauty. Together, they were creating something that honored Michael's memory while building something new. Elena had also coordinated with Mrs. Chen to establish a regular schedule for visiting Michael's grave. They decided that Elena would bring flowers on Saturdays when she accompanied Thomas, and Mrs. Chen would visit on Wednesdays with flowers and stories about the market. "He's become like a grandson to me," Mrs. Chen admitted one day. "Talking to him helps me remember my own children back in China." The market community had embraced Elena and Thomas's growing friendship. Other vendors started contributing flowers for Michael's grave. The fruit seller donated money for a small garden bench. The coffee vendor provided free drinks whenever Thomas came to pick up Elena from work. One evening, as Thomas and Elena worked together in the garden, Elena asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Thomas, what do you think Michael would want for you now? If he could see you today, what would he say?" Thomas stopped weeding and considered the question seriously. "Michael always worried that I worked too much, that I didn't have enough friends. Even when he was sick, he would tell me I needed to smile more, laugh more. And he would probably tell me that being sad forever isn't the same as loving him forever. He was always trying to cheer people up, even nurses who were trying to cheer him up." Elena nodded. "I think he would want you to be happy again." "I think so too," Thomas admitted. "But Elena, I need you to know something. I care about you, more than I thought I could care about anyone again. But I will always love Michael. He will always be part of who I am." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Elena replied. "Michael is part of what makes you the man who would step in front of a gun to protect a stranger. He's part of what makes you spend every Saturday honoring love instead of wallowing in grief. I don't want you to stop loving him. I want to love him too." Thomas felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in years, pure happiness. "Elena Rodriguez," he said carefully, "would you like to have dinner with me? A real date, not just working in the garden together?" Elena smiled, the first truly joyful smile Thomas had seen from her. "I would love that. And afterward, would you like to visit Michael? I'd like to introduce you properly. I can't think of anything I'd like more." 6 months later, on a crisp Saturday morning, Elena and Thomas stood together at Michael's grave. But they weren't alone. Mrs. Chen was there, along with several other vendors from the market. Elena's mother had flown in from Mexico for the special occasion. Even some of Thomas's old work friends had come. They were there to witness something that no one could have imagined a year earlier. Elena and Thomas were getting married at Michael's graveside. It wasn't a traditional wedding, but it felt perfect. Elena wore a simple white dress and carried a bouquet of white roses. Thomas wore his best suit and a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. The ceremony was conducted by a pastor who had known Michael during his hospital stays. He spoke about love that transcends death, about how the love between a father and son had somehow created the love between a man and woman. "Michael may not be here in body," the pastor said, "but his spirit lives on in the love that brought Elena and Thomas together. Today we're not just witnessing a wedding. We're witnessing the continuation of a little boy's legacy of love." Elena had written her own vows, and when she spoke them, there wasn't a dry eye in the small gathering. "Thomas, I promise to love you with the same fierce devotion you showed Michael. I promise to honor his memory and keep his spirit alive in our home. I promise to bring flowers to this grave every week for the rest of my life, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude for the boy who led his father to love again." Thomas's vows were simple but powerful. "Elena, you saved my life long before I saved yours. You reminded me that love doesn't end with death, it multiplies. I promise to love you with all the love I have left to give, and I promise that our home will always have white roses, because that's how Michael will know he's welcome there." After they exchanged rings, Elena placed her bridal bouquet on Michael's grave. But then she did something that surprised everyone, including Thomas. She pulled out a second bouquet, a smaller one made of different colored flowers. "These are for Michael," she announced, from his new stepmother. "I picked each flower for a reason. Yellow roses for the sunshine he brought to his father's life. Blue delphiniums for the peace he's found. Pink carnations for the unconditional love he taught his father. And white lilies for the purity of a soul that left this world too soon but continues to guide us." As Elena placed the second bouquet on the grave, something magical happened. A gentle breeze stirred the flowers, and for just a moment, the white roses seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. Mrs. Chen whispered what everyone was thinking: "Michael approves." 1 year after their wedding, Elena and Thomas received news that would change their lives again. Elena was pregnant. They had been trying for several months, both excited and nervous about bringing a new life into their family. When the doctor confirmed the pregnancy, Thomas cried tears of joy and fear. What if I can't love another child the way I loved Michael? He confessed to Elena that night. Love isn't a limited resource, Elena assured him. The love you had for Michael doesn't disappear when you love someone new. It grows bigger to include more people. What if something happens to this baby too? Elena took his hands in hers. Then we'll face it together just like we face everything else. But Thomas, we can't let fear of loss prevent us from embracing love. Throughout the pregnancy, Elena continued her weekly visits to Michael's grave, now bringing flowers for both of her boys. She would sit by the headstone and talk to Michael about his future sibling. Your baby brother or sister is going to hear all about you, she would tell him. They're going to know they have a big brother watching over them from heaven. When Elena went into labor on a snowy December morning, Thomas was terrified. The last time he had been in a hospital delivery room, he had held Michael for the first time. Now he was about to hold Michael's sibling. After 12 hours of labor, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. As Thomas held his son for the first time, he was amazed by the rush of love he felt. It wasn't the same as his love for Michael, but it was just as powerful. What should we name him? Elena asked weakly from her hospital bed. Thomas looked down at the tiny face peering up at him. Gabriel, he said without hesitation. Michael's little brother Gabriel. Elena smiled. Gabriel Martinez Walker. I love it. When they brought Gabriel home from the hospital, their first stop was the cemetery. It was important to them that Michael be among the first to meet his baby brother. As they stood at the graveside, Thomas holding Gabriel while Elena arranged fresh white roses, something beautiful happened. Baby Gabriel, who had been fussy all morning, suddenly became completely calm. He stopped crying and seemed to be looking at something above the headstone that only he could see. I think he sees his big brother, Elena whispered. I think you're right, Thomas replied, feeling more at peace than he had since Michael's death. 3 years later, the Martinez Walker family had grown in ways they never expected. Gabriel was a happy, energetic 3-year-old who loved flowers almost as much as his late brother had. Elena had expanded her flower stand into a small shop, and Thomas had started a custom furniture business specializing in garden structures. But the most beautiful change was in their Saturday routine. Every Saturday morning, the family would visit Michael's grave together. Gabriel would help Elena arrange the flowers while Thomas cleaned the headstone and tended to the small garden they had planted around the plot. Gabriel had grown up knowing about his big brother Michael, and he accepted it as naturally as any other family story. He would chatter to the headstone about his week, his toys, his friends at daycare. Michael, I learned to ride my bike, Gabriel announced during one visit. Daddy says you would be proud of me. Elena and Thomas exchanged meaningful looks. Gabriel's innocence and acceptance had helped heal something in both of them. Mrs. Chin, now in her 70s, still brought flowers to Michael's grave every Wednesday. She had become like a grandmother to Gabriel, and he adored her stories about the market and the flowers. On Gabriel's 3rd birthday, Elena and Thomas decided to do something special. They had saved up enough money to commission a beautiful granite bench to be placed at Michael's grave, with an inscription that would honor both boys. The inscription read, "In loving memory of Michael James Walker, who taught us that love never dies, it only grows. In gratitude for Gabriel Martinez Walker, who taught us that new love doesn't replace old love, it joins it. Brothers in spirit, forever." As they unveiled the bench with Gabriel's help, Elena reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. "Thomas," she said quietly while Gabriel played with the flowers, "do you ever think about what would have happened if those men hadn't robbed my stand that day?" Thomas considered the question. "We might never have really met. We might have spent our whole lives passing each other in the market without connecting. Do you think Michael had something to do with it?" Thomas looked at his son's grave, then at his wife, then at Gabriel happily arranging flowers. "I think Michael knew his father needed to learn how to live again, not just exist. And I think he knew you needed someone to love who would appreciate your beautiful heart." Elena leaned against Thomas's shoulder. "Sometimes I wonder if the bullet you took was meant to bring us together. Like it was part of some larger plan." "Maybe it was," Thomas agreed. "All I know is that the worst thing that ever happened to me, losing Michael, somehow led to some of the best things that ever happened to me, finding you, having Gabriel, learning to love again." Gabriel ran over to them, his small hands full of white rose petals. "Mommy, Daddy, look. Michael's flowers are sharing their petals with me." Elena and Thomas laughed, scooping Gabriel up between them. As they sat on the new bench, surrounded by flowers and memories and love, Elena understood something profound. She had thought she was just a flower seller before she met Thomas. But she had actually been preparing for her real job all along, helping a broken family grow back together, one flower at a time. 10 years later, Elena Martinez Walker stood behind the counter of her thriving flower shop, Michael's Garden, watching her husband Thomas teach their son Gabriel how to build a flower display case. Gabriel, now 13, had inherited both his father's skill with tools and his mother's gift with flowers. The shop was named in honor of Michael, and his picture hung prominently near the register. Regular customers had learned his story and often asked about him. Elena loved sharing memories of the boy she had never met but felt like she had known forever. Every Saturday the family still visited Michael's grave, though now Gabriel often brought friends from school who were curious about his angel brother. Elena had started a small scholarship fund in Michael's name for children fighting cancer, funded by proceeds from special white rose arrangements. Mrs. Chen, now 80 and moving more slowly, still made her Wednesday visits to the cemetery. Gabriel often accompanied her, pushing her wheelchair and carrying the flowers. The market where Elena and Thomas had first met had become a local landmark, with a small plaque commemorating the flower seller and the hero, whose story had inspired the community to look out for one another. Elena often thought about the morning she had cowered behind her flower stand while Thomas took a bullet meant for her. She had been so young then, so scared, so alone in the world. She never could have imagined that the worst moment of her life would become the foundation for the best life she could have dreamed of. On this particular Saturday, as the family prepared for their weekly cemetery visit, Gabriel made an announcement that surprised them. "Mom, Dad, I've been thinking about what I want to do when I grow up." "Oh?" Elena asked, expecting him to say something about carpentry or flower arranging. "I want to be a doctor who helps kids with cancer like Michael had. But I also want to keep growing flowers like you do, Mom. I think sick kids would like to have beautiful flowers in their hospital rooms." Elena felt tears in her eyes. Gabriel had never known Michael, but somehow his brother's spirit lived on in his dreams and aspirations. "That sounds like a beautiful plan, Mijo," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I want to keep bringing flowers to Michael every Saturday, even when I'm a grown-up with my own family. Because he's part of our family forever." As they drove to Evergreen Cemetery that morning, Elena reflected on the mysterious ways that love finds a way to continue, even after loss. Michael had been gone for over 13 years, but his influence was still shaping their family's future. At the cemetery they found Mrs. Chen already there, sitting on Michael's bench with a bouquet of mixed flowers in her lap. "Grandmother Chen," Gabriel called out, running to hug her. "You're early today." "I had extra flowers today," she explained. "A young couple came to my vegetable stand this morning very sad. They had just lost their baby. I gave them some flowers and told them about Michael, about how love continues even after death. They wanted me to bring these flowers here, to thank Michael for the comfort his story gave them." Elena and Thomas exchanged amazed looks. Even now, years later, Michael's story was still bringing comfort to other grieving parents. As they arranged all the flowers together, Gabriel's white roses, Mrs. Chen's mixed bouquet, and Elena's special arrangement of seasonal blooms, Elena spoke aloud to Michael as she always did. "Michael, your baby brother is growing up to be just like you, kind, brave, and determined to help others. Your daddy is happy again, really happy. And your story is still helping people find hope. I think you would be proud of the family you helped create." A gentle breeze stirred the flowers, and for a moment, the white roses seemed to dance in the sunlight. Gabriel clapped his hands in delight. "Michael likes what we brought him today," he announced with the certainty that only children possess. Mrs. Chen smiled. "I think you're right, little one." As they sat together on the bench, for generations connected by love and loss and flowers, Elena thought about the incredible journey that had brought them all together. She had been just a struggling flower seller when Thomas first appeared at her stand, a broken man buying roses for his dead son. Now she was a successful business owner, a beloved wife, a devoted mother, and a pillar of their community. Thomas had been a man drowning in grief, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Now he was building beautiful things again, not just with his hands but with his heart. Gabriel had been born into a family already shaped by loss, but instead of being burdened by sadness, he had been blessed with an extra portion of love and purpose. And Mrs. Chen had found a new family to love in her golden years, proving that kindness creates bonds stronger than blood. "You know what I think?" Elena said suddenly, looking around at her chosen family gathered in this peaceful place. "What's that, mi amor?" Thomas asked. "I think Michael wasn't just loving white roses because they looked like angel wings. I think he was preparing us to recognize angels when we met them. Mrs. Chen is an angel who watched over his grave. Gabriel is an angel who brought new joy to our lives. And maybe, Maybe we're all angels for each other. Thomas squeezed her hand. Maybe the real miracle isn't that I took a bullet for you that day. Maybe the miracle is that taking that bullet led to all of this family, this love, this life we've built together. Gabriel looked up from the flowers he was arranging. Does that mean I'm part of the miracle too? You're the best part of the miracle, Mijo, Elena assured him. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting golden light across the cemetery, the Martinez-Walker family prepared to leave. But before they went, Gabriel had one more announcement. Next week is Father's Day, he said seriously. I want to bring something extra special for Michael, because even though he's in heaven, he's still Daddy's first son. Elena felt her heart swell with love for this wise little boy who understood that honoring the past was the best way to embrace the future. What did you have in mind? Thomas asked. I want to bring a picture of our whole family, me, you, Mommy, and Grandmother Chin. So Michael can see how big our family got because of him. Elena and Thomas looked at each other with tears in their eyes. Their 13-year-old son had just articulated something beautiful. Michael wasn't separate from their current family, he was the foundation of it. That's a perfect idea, Gabriel, Elena said. I think Michael would love that very much. As they walked back to their car, Elena turned for one last look at Michael's grave, now surrounded by flowers and love and the promise of weekly visits for years to come. A single father had taken a bullet protecting a flower seller in the market. The next day she had covered his son's grave with roses. But that was just the beginning of a love story that had grown to include everyone they touched. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the deepest grief. Sometimes the most perfect families are built from broken pieces. And sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with romance, but with sacrifice. Elena took Thomas's hand as they reached the car, Gabriel skipping ahead of them, already planning next week's flower arrangement for his big brother. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For being brave enough to protect a stranger. For showing me what real love looks like. For giving me the most beautiful life I never could have imagined. Thomas kissed her forehead gently. Thank you for covering my son's grave with roses that first day. Thank you for seeing that a broken man could still be worth loving. Thank you for making me believe in tomorrow again. As they drove home in the fading light, their car filled with the sweet scent of leftover flowers, Elena reflected on the mysterious ways that love finds a way to continue, to grow, to transform even the darkest moments into light. A flower seller and a grieving father. A bullet and a bouquet of roses. A cemetery visit that became a love story. A family built on the foundation of remembering, honoring, and never letting go of love. Michael's grave would never lack for flowers again. But more than that, his memory would live on in every act of kindness his story inspired, every family it brought together, every moment of hope it gave to people who thought their own stories were over. The boy who had seen angels and white roses had become an angel himself, watching over a love that grew stronger with each passing season, each Saturday visit, each flower placed with care and gratitude on the sacred ground where love and loss had learned to dance together. And in the end, that was the most beautiful story of all. Not the story of an ending, but the story of a love that refused to end, choosing instead to multiply and flourish like the most resilient flower in the most unexpected garden. Elena Martinez-Walker, the flower seller who had found her forever family through tragedy and grace, had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most beautiful roses grow from the richest soil, and the richest soil is always made of equal parts tears and hope. The Martinez-Walker family lived happily ever after, not because their life was perfect, but because they had learned that perfect isn't the point. Love is the point. Remembering is the point. And choosing each other, every single day, in honor of a little boy who had taught them all how to bloom again. Michael's white roses would continue to grace his grave every Saturday, placed there by hands that loved him and hearts that would never forget him. But they would also grace the world, carried forward by the family whose love story began with a bullet, blossomed with roses, and grew into something more beautiful than any garden could contain. Sometimes heroes do get the happy endings they deserve. Sometimes flower sellers become the foundation of families they never expected. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, protecting someone else's life means they save yours right back. Not just once but every day for the rest of your life.